Hello and welcome to another episode of COVID TF Dialogue. Today we are going to talk to Apar Gupta, who is a very famous lawyer and a person who understands issues around internet access, privacy, and other things. He writes also in various newspapers. He is also head of Internet Freedom Foundation, the organization who is trying to bring forth issues around internet at the time of COVID. That is very, very important. So today we are going to talk to Apar to find out what are the things that is taking place in the country around internet and privacy and access, and what are the problems that we are facing because of COVID. So Apar, thank you very much for finding time to join DEF Dialogue. Yeah, so what I am actually asking is not a particular question, but a scenario that we are in a health crisis, we are in a lockdown crisis, we are a democratic country, one of the largest democracy, and we are also in a situation of crisis of access and crisis of infrastructural issues and humanitarian issues. How do you react to such situation? Considering that you also work or you work also in the area of internet.
So I think we have to appreciate what's going on today in our course of life is unprecedented, and we have not dealt with a pandemic during our lifetimes. And this is not only a threat against human health, it is a threat to the larger framework of our constitutional design, in which a democracy means power to the people, and people hold that power, and their representatives in government exercise functions towards making sure that that democratic polity is enjoyed to the true and the best potential of human welfare. That so we can achieve as human beings, each one of us individually, our goals in terms of health, education, nutrition, family, friends, and all of this comes from an enabling environment which is there. To a large degree, this enabling environment, Osama, and this links to DIF's core work, is access to digital technologies, which has been till date been not percolating down to the masses, to the Bharat, which is a necessity. The latest TRAI reports show a density of 2 is to 1 per person in terms of two connections for one person in Delhi, but it shows underrepresentation in which there is sometimes not even one connection for four people in certain rural districts in our country. This large inequity which is there manifests itself when we talk about social distancing, stay at home, and there has been quite a nice way how people have put that in how different sections of Indian society, especially those who lack wealth, those who lack landed property, those who lack pakka houses, how do they socially distance? So if you can't socially distance, you could not even also be in the economic criteria to have a smartphone. And if you can't have a smartphone, then you can't even engage in a knowledge, skill, or service-based profession which can be done remotely, even if you're literate. Now, leave aside the people who are working in as manual laborers who are facing incredible difficulties, even people who are economically backward, maybe in other regions, they do not have the economic basis of access. The second thing is the infrastructure, and DEF's work illustrates this very completely. So the first point I would like to make is that do we have that actual enabling environment with regard to technology, and what more do we need to do? And there are other aspects also which have been touched upon, with, for instance, of fundamental rights, which are a very core component of achieving this human potential. So I will just stop here by stating that the first element is this enabling environment of making sure that people have enough, given how digital technologies today are, even prior to the present pandemic, a core focus of the government in ensuring that people can avail greater amount of government services with the least amount of friction, inconvenience, and pain.
Smartphone only, I mean, we know that between 400 and 500 million smartphone penetration that everybody talks about, at least 50% of them are concentrated in metropolitan and the cities. Why, where you and me, people like you and me, have got one person with 4 phones or 3 phones or 2 phones or something like that. So we also know that rural India has got less than 200 million mobile penetration. Having said that, connectivity is so low. On the other hand, we have also biometricized all the services. We have Aadharized all the entitlement access. We have bankized or digitalized our banking and financial services. But all of this is not even available to the people, and then we are locked down. Then we are asked not to move. Then we are asked not to go out. And so certainly as people we are expecting that if you don't want us to move around, then let the well come to me rather than I go to the well to drink water, if I can't.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Osama, just to pick up, and you've done considerable work here, and DEF has been a leader. Yeah, I'm not saying this because I'm having this chat with Osama. I would invite viewers to actually go and look at the works DAF has done substantially. It's worked in increasing access, especially in the rural hinterlands, in the hamlocks of our country. So, one of the core insights I've learned through DEF's work by itself has been that it's the last mile. The bottom is the last mile. The second thing I've learned is that individual devices may be a much more aspirational goal, but the creation of common public infrastructure in such areas is also needed, because people are semi-literate. They are having these devices for the first time, and there is a great sense of community which is usually there, which lacks in gated societies or with the middle class. Even though it's there to some degree, I would say it's in a greater degree, because the resource dependency in rural areas requires people to pull together. And the example of the well, as you were just taking, right? There is a shared well from which everyone draws water. Everyone does not have their own piped water connections in the rural spaces. And this metaphor speaks to how Gram Panchayats, the BharatNet initiative, and these are good things the government has done. It has focused, but the question mark, as is Aruna ji, the former DOT secretary, we were having one other webinar organized by Agami, and she was saying that the pace of deployment has not been satisfactory. We've not been able to firstly roll out the underlying infrastructure which is needed. And the second, we have not been able to lay fiber down to the panchayat, where the panchayat itself becomes a service provider, an information hub, and essentially even a engaging community resource where people can come, not only gain access to core services, but should be viewed as people who are participating in the full breadth of the internet. And Osama, there is one op-ed you wrote, which always I like to quote. It is your experience with these communities when they first gain access to the internet, and what do they first want to access? It is not the minimum crop support prices. Sometimes it is a henna pattern which is put by women with mehendi. Okay, so we need to look at the internet also in a way where we are looking at people who may not have as much as we have, as being complete participants, doing it for frivolity as much as access to government services, which is why it is important that net neutrality and the way we give access is the access to the entire internet. We can't be paternalistic and say that you get only access to these 10 or 15 government services on a priority and the rest can be given to you later, because that will not actually build that strong bond and connection which we all today feel with the internet, having enjoyed it in its true diversity and beauty.
So what do you think? I mean, of course, COVID kind of crisis has highlighted our inability to have access, digital access, in the nooks and corners of the country. And if it would have been there with lots of bandwidth, the life would have been much more easier for government to reach to them with facilities and the services and the humanitarian aid also, rather than the difficulty that we are facing at the moment. At the same time, government on the other hand tells people to download this Arogya app and tells you to do hundreds of other things, which is actually sounds very authoritarian and non-democratic and non-participative, where people would be feeling very happy. I mean, if you tell us to download an app which will give you a food or a ration, that would have been much more easier and for people to give all the information, rather than you are saying that, you know, give me all this information, because without which I cannot trace you and track you, and I want to track you because I want to fight COVID. How do you react to this kind of situation where our approach to digital utilization for the mass benefit is on the back seat, but the digital utilization of for surveillance and data collection from the people is much more on the higher side?
Osama, this is a very complex and a bundled question, right? And as we've approached all these issues, I'll approach it with a great degree of honesty, but also presuming good faith on the government. I say this as a person who quite often points fault and criticism towards the government, but it's the government, I think, and I have hope, which is the primary service provider and can actualize our fundamental rights rather than damage them. However, I'm disappointed it's not doing that. It is actually undermining our right to privacy, our autonomy, our dignity. And these are just not words. Let us look at it in terms of a wider construct. I talked about an enabling environment. This comes from a lot of the writing of Professor Amartya Sen. He said, and recently in an op-ed in the Financial Times, how this is a crisis, is an opportunity to focus on the human development aspects and focusing public investment there. But there was another op-ed also by Arundhati Roy in the Financial Times, again, a free to read column, which I invite everyone, that it's a good way to reset. Pandemics are opportunities. We have to look at what has been going wrong and to reset that. So going with that, how can we achieve a much more positive reset for fundamental rights? And I would say that requires course correction by the government of India, which will be very hard to do without active citizen pushback. People who are watching this video, who are engaging in conversation with us, we need to raise our voices and make our lawmakers aware that we care about fundamental rights, about our privacy as an electoral issue. It matters to us, irrespective of the party, especially the party which is in power right now. Finally, these risks are conceptualized in the third Financial Times op-ed, and I'm naming them because they all three are free to read, and I would urge people to go there. I'm not having any revenue share arrangement with them, but it's just great in terms of thinking. So the third one is by Yuval Noah Harari, and he's the author of two books, Homo Deus, and he's very celebrated in the startup fraternity also, with the radical way how he's been looking at how history links to our present and what it holds for our future. So he says a very interesting thing, that governments are using this pandemic as an opportunity to roll out surveillance programs to track people pervasively, which may never get rolled back. And they may become a permanent surveillance infrastructure, where we may even move from what is conventionally being called from over the skin surveillance to under the skin surveillance. And what does he mean by over the skin and under the skin? Over the skin would mean that there's a camera at a distance which is gathering your movements. Okay, and under the skin surveillance means that, and he does not say that there'll be chips implanted, but there may be wearable devices which may be imposed on people. It's a system of coercion, and tracking becomes so personal. So I know a lot of people and a lot of friends, they have this bad habit. Even when they're sitting, they can't, in fact, leave the grasp of their smartphone. I think it's because it's warm also. So it gives them a sense of warmth, that they're holding hands with somebody else. just like the Nokia symbol we used to see when feature phones were just launched. But here's the thing. The smartphone is also having so many sensors. It is gathering your data pervasively. But is that data in our control? That data is not in our control. It is going to private companies in an unaccountable manner for which we need a data protection law. And on top of that, now we have a government which wants that data, but much more. And the government has more power. It has the power of law and order. It has the power of taxation. So we feel scared, and we feel scared naturally because there's no regulation. There's no data protection authority. There is no surveillance reform. And also the Arogya Setu app, now specifically I'll get into what are the problems into it, but much more fundamentally, the use of the app is not being promoted in a public health, as a public health priority, but as a personal data gathering measure. So the purpose of the app is to situate it within the trace, diagnose and quarantine and cure mechanism, which has been essentially articulated by the World Health Organization. So the technology is an element of that policy design. It's not freestanding and it's not a priority by itself. So Arogya Setu is a part of the public health strategy, and but what are the public health strategy actually saying? That such apps can only be successful when they are installed in a system of trust, fraternity, in which the people keep using them because they feel that this is the way how I can actually save the lives of others. Yes, but what we are noticing today is a shift from cooperation and social fraternity to coercion, coercion and force. And this is very worrying, because when we get into the features of the app, you will understand how much data it is gathering, but it is essentially a mass surveillance device, which today, if you do not install, you run the risk of criminal prosecution. And I would say, just think about it in a very reductionist manner. The government wants to send you to jail for you not installing a smartphone application. Doesn't that sound very weird, especially in a democratic country? Doesn't that sound peculiar? And democracy was not about fighting and throwing the Britishers out. As per Kanibiram, it is about each individual human being in India being the repository of autonomy, dignity, and power by itself, which they entrust to the government in order to achieve human welfare. One thing which has been very worrying, and I have been noticing it for quite some time, as much as I am a person who really appreciates what the police departments do, I honestly think that they are underpaid, they work overtime, and they're very stressed. I think they're under-resourced also. But I see that this public health pandemic is being dealt through the police. So the law and order lens is a very natural lens, which is not only visible in the policy pronouncements of the central government, but even if we look at the state governments. For instance, just look at Telangana, right? Just look at Karnataka. Just look at even West Bengal or Delhi or Kerala. All the states are using police as a very visible marker of enforcement of the lockdown. But even beyond that, coming up with arbitrary rules, directions. So the law and order focus and towards criminalization is actually a very high threshold, how we have moved from making this epidemic from a social taboo that he has COVID, stay away from him, to he has COVID and he's a criminal and should be locked up. And the thing is, when you build taboo around an infectious disease, just like TB, what have been our learnings? Our learnings have been people do not report them. And when self-reporting goes down, the infection spikes up. Now, the second thing is the government interested in it? I'm not attributing bad faith to it, but these are the facts. We at the Internet Freedom Foundation, we press for your digital rights, your fundamental rights. And quite often it means taking a combative stand, being principled, and doing things such as filing RTI applications because the government is not transparent. And the government is not transparent about Arogya Setu. And I would call the government a homogeneous entity, because it seems that none of the central government ministries are forthcoming beyond a PIB press release as to what is the underlying legal mechanism, what are the office orders, what is the product architecture, what is the source code, who is building this app, what are the service conditions, and ultimately this data which is residing on this server and is assured to us will be deleted and everything is voluntary by itself. Is it open to third-party audits and scrutiny? Now, all of these are open questions. And when we file RTS, who do we file with? We file with the Ministry of Health, because this is a public healthcare technology-based intervention. But what does the Ministry of Health respond and state? It has no information about Arogya Setu. It does not know anything about Arogya Setu. It does not have a seat on the table with respect to the discussions which are taking place with respect to Arogya Setu. So who is doing this? And these questions build suspicion. I would not attribute bad faith, but I would say it is not a problem of a lack of proper communication by the government. It is a problem of inherent transparency and disclosure. And at best, what will happen? People will discover that there are some faults. People will say and make recommendations and say, you can do this better in such and such manner. And why should the government be afraid of this criticism if it leads to something which is constructive, positive, and actually leads to the protection of our privacy and fundamental rights? So I would say it is lacking in a demonstration of good faith, but I would not say it is acting in bad faith. We'll get to know that in a few months.
Yeah, I mean, they will prove themselves.
Yes,
sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it is through interactions like this. And if any friends in government are watching this, and I do regard you as friends, I do regard you as colleagues who are taking forward this very important civic duty, I would really urge you to do things in the proper manner to uphold our privacy. We do not regard you as being others. We regard you as being people who are more responsible, having the vestige of power and putting it in accordance with our constitutional framework. The responsibility lies on you. And that is why we criticize with the hope that you will do better.
Exactly. I mean, just to complement to what you are saying is that if you have a right intention to provide, using app or using mobile or tracing people with the purpose of finding a solution, the whole design of penetration of achieving more than 50% is an impossible number in our country because of the lack of 50% penetration of a smartphone itself. And because of the lack of penetration of right way of taking this app to the people who can report it back. So even if I don't talk about privacy and other things or data collection, I can only talk about tracing and collecting the data to save people's lives. It is not possible at all.
Definitely. So one more critique which has emerged very strongly for people like Sean McDonald, who's an international expert and has been looking at contact tracing. He says contact tracing sometimes is mass surveillance because contact tracing does not have any clear evidence by itself that it works as a standalone priority when it does not integrate well enough in which the data is shared with medical professionals. So if you take it as a diagnosis tool, the app, which is automatic contact tracing as opposed to manual contact tracing, where the information is put towards medical diagnosis and investigation, which is the latter, manual, as opposed to automatic and algorithmic. He says there is no evidence it works. And experiences even from Singapore teach us the same. So what should we do? I think we need to get back to the basics of policy making, which starts from evidence, having periodic reviews on the basis of the evidence which is gathered, and designing our technology interventions in a measured manner which protects fundamental rights and advances them, rather than constructing a trade-off between public health and privacy. And I would say that there are certain actions which the central government takes, for instance, the Home Ministry's directives for mandatory Arogya Setu, which then invites a criminal penalty, which is nothing but a very draconian measure. And I'm sorry to say it, it reeks of authoritarianism. And this is what manifests itself in how the Noida authorities, for instance, have issued a Section 144 order that anybody who does not have the Arogya Setu app on their smartphone, they risk being prosecuted under Section 188 and being actually imprisoned or being levied with a fine on conviction. These are very harsh penalties. And who are the people who are going to suffer due to this? It is quite often not only going to be people who are middle class, it is going to be people, for instance, who are much older than us, our parents, our grandparents, who may have a smartphone but may not know how to install an app, how to use an app. It may be a person who may be very young. It may be it may be a person who may have a phone whose memory is full because they have personal videos, they have work information on that phone. We are not accounting for these kind of instances. So rather than building an open, compassionate society, which direction are we going with through these technology interventions really makes me consider that whether this pandemic is an opportunity for us to reassess ourselves in the best manner and light, or is it leading to an instance in which people are scared and certain sections of the government or public officials are using this as an opportunity to further increase their level of control over individuals?
Wonderful. So I would like to end the discussion by asking you to talk about what IFF is doing in this moment of crisis, so that you can also highlight some of the work that you people are doing and maybe invite some more people to participate and help in this entire fight.
So Osama has been, let me now disclose it. Osama has been a long-time supporter of IFF. He was one of the first few people who supported our vision. And that's why it seems that there's an incredible amount of bonhomie here, because we see that both access as well as the political quality of the access is important. And this is a very important thing. I'll unpack that. It's come through conversations with Osama. When people get access to the internet, what kind of access are they getting to the internet if they can't actually exercise their fundamental rights, which means free speech, not hate speech, which means privacy, which is a reasonable form of privacy, not a cover of anonymity in order to commit crimes. And we have this broad sense of principle where people get access, but they get access with the political freedoms which are enshrined in our constitution. So IFF does work on more or less the latter spectrum of ensuring that people enjoy that political quality of access to the internet. So what have we done from the beginning? We are a rapid response advocacy organization. We have done multiple things, which include from the initial moment of COVID itself to anticipating how network speeds may be impacted at the last mile to suggest periodic reviews, which is a much more dryish, policy-ish kind of recommendation to the Department of Telecom and the Telecom Regulatory Authority to work even on the large number of arrests which are taking place for quote unquote fake news, which may be just people being mistaken and tweeting something. So they really should not be criminally prosecuted about it if it is not raising to the level of actually incitement of an offense or hate speech. And we have proposed to the Home Ministry to take out advisory, because there have been more than 500 arrests. You can go and check. Some of them are very egregious arrests on our website. We've made reference to special frameworks in which fake news and disinformation can be seen not only as a legal problem, but as a social problem. And Osama and DAF have again done a lot of work on civic literacy around disinformation. Finally, on privacy and surveillance, we paced together, me and my colleague Siddharth, the trustees, the entire staff, Devdatta, Shivani, Fakhanda, all of us paced together to build a very comprehensive working paper on Arogya Setu, contact tracing, and the impacts of privacy, which have 14 recommendations, which we are revising as the app itself is also going through upgrades. And we hope to make that to government. And in addition to that, for more than 45 organizations, which include labor unions principally, which include digital rights organizations, which also include gender rights organizations, civil liberties organizations, and more than 100 prominent individuals, including former bureaucrats, including from the Ministry of Electronics and IT, who have co-signed it, who say one simple thing. This is our most recent intervention, the most significant one actually, that says that please do not make Arogya Setu mandatory, because it will have an adverse impact on workmen, on work persons who are working in factory floors, who do not have smartphones and can be criminally prosecuted. And of course, when somebody fears criminal prosecution, it quite often happens to the way they look, right? The way they dress, the way they speak. So there's always a criminal prosecution which happens more towards people who do not have power in society, who cannot negotiate with a cop on the road. I'm a lawyer, I know English, but a person can't who lacks that facility. So they have signed this letter and sent it to the Home Ministry asking for a review of this direction, that even outside containment zones, why are you forcing employers to impose mandatory Arogya Setu on all the workers? And if they don't do it, you are actually saying that they will be criminally prosecuted. So this is our most recent intervention around COVID, privacy and surveillance. I invite people to also look at our larger work. It includes access, fighting against internet shutdowns, making sure all people in Jammu and all people in Kashmir have access to 4G internet, because 4G internet today is very important for medical professionals, telemedicine, even for patients and coordination. We are looking at it both from a fundamental rights and a social justice perspective. And I think these interventions are being widely appreciated and supported with partners such as DEF, but many others as well. People like you, individuals who are all coming together in this sense of crisis, sharing resources, and even sections of the government. But I would always urge them to do better, because they have the power to do better. And one can only hope, one can only urge, and if that does not happen, one can only challenge. So we'll do our part.
I want to conclude by saying that you said a very nice, I don't know whether you realize that, but in the digital world, government is losing the compassion of using digital and more, other ways of doing digital. If the digital usage, the usage of digital access, digital privacy, digital device, digital everything brings in compassion and collaboration, our empowerment would be much more better and all that, rather than the reverse that we are always bothered about, which is surveillance, privacy, and violation of rights and so on and so forth. But thank you very much for highlighting this.
Thank you. And Osama, just one final thing. All our work is public. It's available on internetfreedom.in if any of the viewers would like to see it.
Of course.
View it. Osama, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for taking out the time. I keep learning from you, and I hope to keep learning from you.